I've got a half dozen excellent nonfiction history books I want to tell you about today, plus a bonus rec. My thinking behind it was we are getting close to this time of year where we're going to start hitting our top fives and top tens for 2025 with all the different genres that I've read. And these books today are essentially my honorable mentions that are all 4 stars and above, with a great mix of topics from around the world and from various eras. So I hope you find your next read right here, or maybe something that you can put on the old wish list for Christmas. And this next bit is extremely relevant because today's video is brought to you by Shortform. This is the perfect solution if you want to read my book recommendations, but you just don't have the time to read everything cover to cover. I get it. Life gets in the way. Your TBR is cuckoo bonkers. It happens. So Shortform's team makes fantastic guides to the world's best nonfiction, and their guides just don't summarize. They explain, they analyze, they connect ideas across titles. So when I went through their guide to refresh my memory of A People's History of the United States by Howard Zinn, it brought me back in time to when I read it decades ago. And their team of writers just nailed it. And you can explore guides in history, psychology, business, self-improvement, and more. Plus, every summary links to related ideas, so you always know what to read next. And you can try a trial of Shortform or get the annual plan with $50 off at shortform.com/Michael Kist. That's shortform.com/Michael Kist. And I slapped that link in the description for you to make it easy. All right, normal CTAs like and subscribe, share with a friend, throw a book recommendation in the comments, let me know what you thought of any of these books. Check out my Bindery community. We're over 2,500 followers and we're so close to 400 paid members. It just continues to grow. And it's amazing to see all the new faces in the Discord discussing books and giving fantastic recommendations. The buddy read channels, the book clubs, all of it's there. But yeah, let's get right into it with our first book. One of the wildest, least talked about episodes in all of European history is the Munster Rebellion in 16th century Germany, aka the moment when an apocalyptic religious sect took over a city and absolutely lost the plot. And the book that dragged me back into this rabbit hole is False Prophets and Preachers, Henry Gresbeck's account of the Anabaptist Kingdom of Munster, translated by Christopher S. Mackey. Now, I first heard about this whole saga from Dan Carlin's legendary hardcore history episode, Prophets of Doom, which I have listened to conservatively a half dozen times. And Carlin mostly leans on Herman von Kersenbrock's version of events, one of the 2 main primary sources that we have. The challenge is that translation, the narrative of the Anabaptist madness, also by Mackay, is out of print, and it's currently running over $400. I can't justify that. But this book, the Gresbeck account, is still in print around $70. And honestly, it's arguably the more reliable of the 2, even though Gresbeck is far from neutral. Meanwhile, there's also The Tailor King by Anthony Arthur, which goes for about $40 now in paperback. And I did grab a copy of that. It's on my monstrosity of a TBR. Okay, reset. What actually happened here? So the Protestant Reformation is exploding across Europe when this radical offshoot called the Anabaptists emerges. They reject infant baptism, they preach a looming apocalypse, and find themselves persecuted just about everywhere. But then they get a foothold in the city of Munster. And once they're in, they take over. They're booting out dissenters, stacking the city council with believers, and transforming Munster into their new Jerusalem. They build a militia, they raid nearby towns, they impose communal ownership, they introduce polygamy. They genuinely believe that they are God's chosen warriors. And somehow, they keep repelling the professional army outside of the walls, which only inflates their divine mission delusion. And the story just gets stranger and stranger as it goes with each chapter here. Gresbeck, meanwhile, was part of all this before defecting to help the Prince Bishop's forces, the army that's besieging this city. His account is a mix of confession, self-justification, and a desperate attempt to get his confiscated property back. Mackay's notes do heroic work sorting out the inconsistencies and reconstructing the timeline, making this translation incredibly usable. And I won't spoil the ending, but let's just say the reason that these iron cages still hang from St. Lambert's Church today is because of this story. This is a tremendous academic work of a wild history, well worth the price of admission. All right, for the next one here, I have read a bunch of sweeping histories and overviews of the ancient Near East, and this one really stood apart. I'm talking about Weavers, Scribes, and Kings, A New History of the Ancient Near East by Amanda H. Podney. Podney gives you all the big legendary names, the Hammurabis, the Ashurbanipals, the Cyrus the Great, but she also digs into the lives of folks that we never hear about. The weavers, the scribes, the merchants, the brickmakers, the envoys, the musicians, even the barbers. Like, you don't just learn that the ziggurat of Ur was built around 2100 BC. You actually get a sense of what it felt like to be the brickmaker working on the thing. You get the engineering headaches, the improvisation, the day-to-day grind. And Podney does this again and again, whether it's a trading family in Mari or a princess tucked inside some palace archive. You get real people, not just the names in a textbook. In that way, it's a great balance of macro and micro, top-down and bottom-up history. And she does all of this while covering mainly Mesopotamia, Syria, and Elam from 3500 to 350 BC. All the swings in power, the rise of writing, the wars, the declines and falls. But again, she never loses sight of the beer brewer, the messenger, the kid learning math. And I'll give her credit because even with the personal touch to it, this could have been very academic and stuffy. Like, she did her research and she knows her stuff, but I still found it very readable for how detailed it can be. So it's not going to read like homework. You're not going to have to learn to read like cuneiform tablets to read this. You can jump right into this pretty easily. Do you hear the lawn work? Sorry if you hear the lawn work. There's nothing I can do about that. All right, we'll keep it moving. I did a couple reviews of this next one recently, one in my September wrap on here, one on my short form platform. So assuming there's a higher chance that you saw the one on this platform since you're here, let's run the short form platform review of A Night to Remember by Walter Lord. One of the best books that I've read this year. This thing is so good. I have got a riveting page turner for you right here. If you've been obsessed with the Titanic or you want to give going down that rabbit hole a shot, I can't think of any other starter book to get you going than A Night to Remember, the classic account of the sinking of the Titanic by Walter Lord. The narrative technique that Lord uses here is literary pointillism, meaning you're building a story out of tiny specific details that might seem insignificant on their own, but add up to a beautiful mosaic. And Lord does this by stitching together these personal vignettes from eyewitness accounts to form a fast-paced, minute-by-minute narrative. You're dropped in as the iceberg is in view, and it's go, go, go from there. It's a sub 200-page cinematic and haunting ride that captures the emotion and turmoil of some crazy traumatic scenes. And the reason I'm so interested in the Titanic is because it's got everything. It's the whole human condition jammed into one night. All of this cutting-edge technology colliding with the realities of the natural world and this frantic ticking clock energy where people are making split-second decisions that they have to live with forever, or not, for obvious reasons. You get the best and worst in people. It's every version and shade of humanity captured in this laboratory, this time capsule. Seeing that book is so brisk and written in 1955, my follow-up is going to be an updated, comprehensive, scholarly work on A Sea of Glass, which is bursting with new research and detail. I can and have flipped through this for hours. It is stunning. All right, so I've read a lot of French history this year, and the one that kicked it off in earnest was the super solid House of Lilies, the dynasty that made medieval France. I did that again. I did that last time too. Medieval France by Justine Fernhaber-Baker. I grabbed this one because French history has always been a bit of a blind spot for me, and this was a great starting point. Also, you can't really understand English history, which I was reading a lot about, without the French. And the French Capetians for a long time were the direct rivals to the House of Normandy and the House of Plantagenet. So speaking of which, if you've read The Plantagenets by Dan Jones, which is what kicked off my English history obsession, this is very much in that vein, and that it's sweeping and accessible with a great eye for the story so things don't get bogged down or boring. Now, anytime you cover nearly 4 centuries, dozens of monarchs, endless succession plots, and shifting loyalties, some chunks are going to hit harder and be more interesting than others. For example, I found myself more engaged in the chapters on fellows like Louis IX, Philip IV. But overall, the book did exactly what I was hoping for. It is a broad but readable overview that also challenged my assumptions about medieval France. For example, you may have the vague mental picture of a somewhat unified medieval France, but the reality is France was wildly fragmented, and its central monarchy was pretty doggone weak. for a long time. And Fernhaber-Baker shows how the Capetians slowly built power by marriage alliances, by the sword, clever administration, by crusades. Maybe not that wasn't probably as effective. Also by meddling in English affairs. There's a lot of that. And also by like balancing the papacy. And she also dips into culture, art, architecture, philosophy. You'll spot appearances of figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine, which thank God I love her. But even with all that, we don't get too far in the weeds on anything. And you don't really lose the narrative thread at any point. So in summation, it's exactly the kind of rock solid 4-star introduction I wanted it to be as I begin to dive deeper into French medieval history. And if you're looking for the same, yeah, I would absolutely recommend this. This one really attempts to make you rethink everything you thought you knew about human history. So let's talk about The Dawn of Everything, A New History of Humanity by David Graeber and David Wengrow. This is written by an anthropologist and an archaeologist. This book basically takes a warhammer to the classic story of human development. The idea that we went from small hunter-gatherer bands to agriculture to rigid hierarchies and states in some inevitable straight line. Graeber and Wengrow argue that the total opposite, that humans had far more agency than the narrative gives them credit for. Early societies experimented constantly with power, with equality, with leadership, with scale, often shifting between political systems depending on season or need. They argue, mostly effectively, that we aren't passengers on a runaway train to modern nation states. We actively built and rebuilt worlds in ways that we barely talk about today. So essentially it pushes back hard against determinism, the kind you see in big picture books like Guns, Germs, and Steel, which in my opinion doesn't dig nearly deep enough into its own claims. If that book shaped your understanding of early human societies, The Dawn of Everything is the corrective lens. Now, that doesn't mean everything here lands perfectly. Some arguments are stronger than others, and they don't fully answer the elephant in the room question. If a world dominated by states wasn't inevitable, then how did this reality win out? But even those gaps spark new questions, and that's part of the value here. It gives you the framework to interrogate, challenge, or build on. So yeah, if debates and nerd fights about big picture human history is your jam, this is worth your time. All right, let's talk about one of the most fascinating military stories from the ancient Greeks, and really the ancient world in general. The Sacred Band by James Romm. It's the subtitle here. The subtitle, 300 Theban Lovers in the Last Days of Greek Freedom. The Sacred Band of Thebes was an elite unit made up of 150 pairs of male lovers, 300 men total, trained to fight and live, and if necessary, die alongside the person that they loved most. And the wild part is, they were not just a symbolic unit or a philosophical experiment. They were genuinely one of the most effective fighting forces in Greek history. And Romm zooms in on the remarkable 40-year window where Thebes rises from a regional power to the dominant force in Greece, and the Sacred Band was at the center of all of that. Their first major breakthrough comes at the Battle of the Tegira, Battle of Tegira in 375 BC. The first time an outnumbered force had ever defeated Sparta, and the beginning of the end of Spartan military supremacy. Then at Leuctra, just a few years later, they utterly crushed the Spartan right wing in an open field battle, which is very rare. Sparta had not been beaten like that in over 300 years. After Leuctra, Sparta never really recovered. And the irony is, it's almost too perfect. A highly disciplined, openly paired force of male lovers permanently breaks the reputation of history's most famously macho warriors. And look, yeah, the Spartans were not without some gay, but Thebes was moving different for sure. I digress. Now, Romm does more than recount battles. He digs into the ancient sources and how different writers responded to this unit. You get Plutarch's belief that lovers fight with unmatched courage, the way other Greek city-states encouraged or structured same-sex mentorships, and even Xenophon's persistent hostility towards Thebes and everything the Sacred Band represented. It is a brisk, engaging read. It's crystal clear, dramatic, and surprisingly moving. I gave it 4.5 stars. Yeah, I recommend it. All right, I got a bonus rec for you, and it's a powerful graphic history memoir, Wake, The History of Women-Led Slave Revolts by Rebecca Hall. As the subtitle states, this digs into the often overlooked or buried stories of women who led or fueled slave revolts. This also documents Hall's archival deep dive, the roadblocks that she's trying to get through to uncover this information. She blends in her own family history, and it results in this work that is part investigation, part personal reckoning, and the art only adds to it in a way that, well, like text only would not be able to deliver. So really quick read, but this thing packs a punch. Check it out. So that is 6 books and a graphic novel, nonfiction history book recommendations. I hope you got something out of it. And again, I just appreciate you being here, hanging out with me to talk about some great doggone books. I'll see you next time on our, what month is it? It's November already. Oh my God. I'll see you next time on the November wrap up, where I talk about all the books that I read in November. And again, thanks for being here. Appreciate y'all.